Hi everyone, my name is Shauna in case you don't know, and welcome back to another video. Today's video is very adult in content. Be warning that I will be talking about sexual topics, and if those make you uncomfortable or if you feel that you are too young to be watching this, feel free to click away. Today I'm going to be talking about a really hyped book that is extremely problematic. It's one that I was really looking forward to, but I was really disappointed. This is not going to be an in-depth full review. You can find my in-depth full review on my Goodreads. That review will be linked down in the description below. And I don't necessarily want this video to deter you from reading the book, but I want to raise awareness to these problematic issues in this book. This book is going to get adapted into a TV show soon. It is so popular. More and more people read it every year. Everyone gushes about how much they love it, but they refuse to address the problematic things. Now, if you like a book and it's problematic, that's completely okay. You just have to address the problematic elements. That's why with Twilight, I talked about Twilight and pedophilia because that was problematic, but I still liked the series. But unfortunately with this one, I didn't really like this book, but I do need to talk about the problem things. And again, it's okay to like this book, just talk about the problem things. It's not okay to not include trigger warnings or content warnings in your review for this book if you enjoyed it. So this book is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Now, I wasn't super familiar with the problems related to Sarah J. Maas. I knew that a lot of people hated her. I heard rumors that she was problematic. I heard rumors that she was racist. And now I can't say for sure whether those are true or not because I haven't looked directly into the author's situation outside of her books, but I can say with 100% certainty that this book is extremely problematic. I took my time reading this book. I think I read it in like 10 days, which is pretty long for me. Normally if I average 50 pages a day, I can finish most books within like 7 days or less, depending on the length of the book. But this one's fairly long and I really took my time with it. I took notes and everything that was problematic so that I can inform people about the problematic elements of this book so that you can make your own decision whether or not you want to read this book or support this author. So let's start off with the one that is a little less triggering, and trigger warnings for this video will be linked down in the description below. So the problematic thing that's a little less triggering is the representation of characters of color. So to start off with, this book is over 400 pages long. It's a fantasy book, so there's not really any excuse for no representation. If you're writing a historical fiction book and you're focusing only on, say, like Norway, maybe it's okay to have only white characters, and maybe it's okay to not have gay characters because it's a historical fiction and because a lot of people like weren't out then. However, with a fantasy book, especially one that was published in I believe 2015, there's no excuse for having no representation or very little representation at all. So there was no LGBTQ+ characters in here. Every single one of them was straight, and there were only 2 characters of color in this entire book. However, they didn't really have any lines. So there's 2 fae or 2 fairies in this book that are described as having darker skin revolving around like brown skin, not tan, because tan in this book is essentially white. Okay, the main character's love interest in this book is described as having tan skin, but he is definitely very white, and it's affirmed by that with character art that I've seen for the love interest. So as I said, 2 characters in here that are described as characters of color. There's nothing more to their identity than just saying that they're fae and saying that they have brown skin. Now, the first one was killed off immediately in a brutal way. The second one didn't really do much. Spoiler alert, I forgot to mention at the start of the video, complete spoilers for this. The other character of color was only used to help bring Feyre back to life. Did I say her name right? Let me look this up, because there's a pronunciation guide. I need to be smart and use this. Feyre, I was correct. So, those 2 characters of color were used as plot devices. There was nothing more for their characters than just being plot devices, especially for that first one that was immediately killed off in a brutal way. It's like how we tell male fantasy authors, stop writing females into your books just to kill them off. Like if a female is just there to die, you're being extremely sexist, and that's unacceptable. It's the same situation with this book. The characters of color were only used as plot devices. They didn't stand as their own characters, and there was nothing more to them than just fulfilling a plot idea that the author had, and it was a very minimal plot idea, as it wasn't like any of these characters saved the day or helped the main character on her journey or anything. So that was the least problematic of the 2 problematic things in this book. But as you can see, that is not acceptable, especially in a book that is so hyped and that was published in, let me double check, 2015. 2015, there was still talks going around about diversity. Okay, it's not like this book was published in like 1980 when there was no talks of diversity or very little talks of diversity. It was published in 2015. The other problem with this book is the one that irks me the most and the one that is making me want to not continue this series. I'm still undecided. A lot of people have told me to continue in the series. They say it gets better, but I'm worried that it's not going to get better because of this problematic thing that I'm about to mention. There are some sexual assault scenes in here, and they were not handled well. Very adult language and descriptions coming up right here, right now. Be warned. So the first somewhat sexual scene that is described in here in detail was not full-on sex, but it was sexual and it was sexual assault. However, it was not dealt with well. So what happened was Tamlin went to the celebration thing that he told Feyre to stay in her room and not go to. He sort of like got his beast mode out and he had sex with a woman because that's how he restores power to the lands at this festival every year. However, Feyre does not follow directions and stay in her room. It's not her fault. He didn't tell her what he would literally do if he found her that night. So he comes back and she is not in her room and he pins her against a wall and sexually assaults her. However, this is not handled well because she is turned on and enjoying it by the end. It's almost like she was like, oh, he's attractive, like it's not that big of a deal because he's attractive. And then she falls in love with him more after she gets sexually assaulted. She clearly states, no, I don't want this. And he clearly continues with what he was doing to her. This is not okay, and the fact that it wasn't even dealt with as if it was sexual assault, even though it was explicitly sexual assault, was not okay. It was dealt with more as if it was like, oh, this is a romantic scene that's like bringing the romance more out and making the romance more like fun and stuff. No, it's not. It's sexual assault. It was not handled well. And then Feyre gets a bruise on her neck too from it, so it's not just like it's just sexual assault, it's like she's actually physically injured from it too. And then the following day, Tamlin victim blames Feyre and blames what happened on her because she didn't stay in her room. That's not okay. That's really not okay. That's like blaming a rape victim for getting raped because they were like outside when it was dark out. Like, that's unacceptable. We all know that's unacceptable. Sarah J. Maas, why do you have that victim blaming in your book? That's all for Tamlin, and I understand why people hate Tamlin now because he's literally a sexual predator. And next up we have Rhys, and everyone's favorite apparently, not my favorite, because he is just as bad as Tamlin, if not worse. So Feyre is clearly really like hating him and not interested in him for most of this book, and when she gets trapped in that cell in the dungeon, Rhys takes her out, gets her drunk every night, makes her wear this outfit that essentially shows off every intimate feature of her body, so she's essentially naked, but she has like this thin sheet of fabric on her, so it's okay, she's not fully naked, right? And then he gets her drunk, makes her do these sexual dances, and touches her waist a lot. That is disgusting. He's literally sexually manipulating her, and like that alone is really bad, but then it gets even worse because at one point he kisses her really forcefully when she doesn't want it. But then by the end of the story, Feyre has magically forgiven him for all of the stuff that he's done to her because, oh, he's trying to save her life. No, there's no excuse for what he did. There's gotta be other ways to save her life. And if the second book doesn't deal with the trauma and PTSD that she's gonna have from being sexually assaulted by both Tamlin and Rhys, then it is gonna be an even worse book than the first book. I am truly disgusted by this book. It is not the worst book that I ever read. I gave it 2 stars instead of 1 star, but it is extremely problematic, and I'm so surprised that it is such a hyped and popular book. We have talks about sexual assault and sexual harassment all the time. We have talks about representation all the time, but for some reason those talks go out the door and don't matter when people read this book because it's so hyped, and because there's so many steamy scenes that I think people just are like, ooh, I'm feeling naughty by reading this, and then they just ignore everything problematic because they're like, ooh, it's so spicy. Like, no, it's not okay. It's okay. It's completely okay to like naughty books, erotica books, whatever you want to call it, but you can't just ignore the problematic parts of this book because you like the book as a whole. It's completely okay to give the book 5 stars. Just please, at the very minimum, put trigger warning, sexual assault at the top of your review. It is not that hard. It is really not that hard. We need to talk about this because I wasn't really aware of the content in this book when I read it. I thought it was just a Beauty and the Beast retelling that was fantasy with some spicy elements. I didn't realize that there was actual sexual assault that was dealt with extremely badly in this book. So this was all for my little rant and all the problematic things in A Court of Thorns and Roses. Now granted, there's a lot of other things I hated about this book, but those were the worst that I felt need to be talked about more. Again, as I said earlier in the video, if you want to hear my full review of A Court of Thorns and Roses, it will be linked down in the description below. It is pretty long, but I detail all of my thoughts on this book, not just the problematic things in the book. I hope this video was informative for you, and I hope this video helps you gain some perspective on this book. I wouldn't necessarily say that I recommend that people read this book, but if you have it on your shelf, if you're really curious about the hype, then definitely give it a shot. Like, don't not read it because it's problematic, but don't be afraid to call out the problematic elements of this book. If you want to see more book-related videos, feel free to subscribe to me and give this video a thumbs up. I upload book-related videos every Tuesday on my YouTube channel, so stick around next Tuesday for another book-related video. Hopefully it will be a more happy one. Trust me, I love reading. There's plenty of books that I enjoy. This one was just not one of those books that I enjoyed. So until next time, goodbye!